Hey folks, I'm running through my very first game of Churchill. It's a solo playthrough of the tournament scenario, which is a 5-turn scenario. Starts at the 6th conference and runs through to the 10th conference. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Churchill, published by GMT Games in 2016, it's a Mark Herman game. And it focuses on the conferences and negotiations that took place between the USA, Great Britain, and the USSR to really decide what to do with, well, first of all, to win the war, to develop a strategy to win the war, but also to decide what to do in the post-war world, how they were going to, well, effectively partition Europe and Southeast Asia. Most of the gameplay focuses around this sort of round table discussion on the left here. And the outcome of these discussions shapes what happens over here in the theatres of war. We've got Europe and Southeast Asia, or the Pacific. I've ran through, this is my first play, I've ran through the first turn, Conference 6. Things went pretty smoothly. The Americans won that first of 8. They won 3 issues. I, as Churchill, won 2 issues. And the USSR, who came charging out of the gates, I think they had maybe 4 issues on their track, but they had exhausted all their cards pretty early, and they ended up with only 1 issue. Now, as I said, I'm playing Churchill, green, Great Britain, and I'm using the bots to determine the actions of the USA and the USSR. All right, so let's begin. I think a good way to show how this all works is to run through a turn of play. And I'm using this summary sheet. So the first thing we do is reveal the top conference card and implement the instructions. So this is the 7th conference in Quebec in September 1944. And we basically follow these instructions. There's an Italian offensive, so the British must place 1 production in the Mediterranean theatre. So I just grab one of these UK productions, and my understanding is I place it in the Mediterranean theatre as a reminder that I have to do that. Stalin stays in Moscow, so Stalin is active, but during the conference Stalin cannot advance an issue. He can still debate. And I think there is a reminder of that. So Stalin may not advance an issue. 7th Army, the US must place 1 production in the Western Theatre. Okay. Place it over there as a reminder. Gothic Line, 1 German reserve to the Mediterranean Theatre. I should also say in that first turn that I played, turn 6, I had a lot of offensive support throughout the board, but there was not a single success anywhere. In Normandy, we launched quite a lot of support. In the Mediterranean, the British had a lot of support. There's quite a fair bit on the Eastern Front, and there was a lot down here in the Pacific, but none of them advanced. I'm hoping to do better this turn. Okay, and the last one is Government in Exile, Leadership in Broglio. Roll 1d6. That's a 4. No effect. That's easy to do. Okay, that's the top conference card. Each player deals himself 7 cards. Okay, now the way the bots work is generally during the debating phase, they will save their best cards for last. During the agenda phase, they roll a d6 to determine which card they play. Before they do that, I'm going to choose my card. And the British obviously almost always want to lead with their highest card. I don't have a lot. Okay. If these 2 are my highest, that's always a gamble. I'd rather not lead with him. So it's going to be one of these 2 guys. He played on an issue on the US track, +1 strength. played on UK production issue, +1 strength. Hopefully we don't get UK production, so I might use that guy. Now, because of Churchill's national characteristic, staff gain +1 strength. So by playing this guy, I give myself a strength of 5. Now, what is Stalin going to do? He's going to roll his red d6. It's a 4, which means he will play his second highest value card. Let's work out what these are. Well, he has a 5 up the back here. So his second highest value is going to be one of these two 4s. If played on US directed offensive, or place a naval marker. If I were the Russians, I'd want to keep that. Actually, I think technically this is the second highest value because it is 4. It may go up to +5 to 1, +1 to 5. And I think that takes superiority over a non-strength attribute. So the Russians are going to play Gregory Kulik. The Americans, what have they got? Let's roll to see who they're going to play. They roll a 1, so they are going to, I think that means they lead with their highest value card. And they do have a 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, yep. They do have a 5. Henry Stimson, he's going to lead the American debate. That then gives us a tie in this agenda phase between the Americans and the British, but the American tiebreaker is that they, or the American national characteristic is, under Roosevelt, they win tiebreaks. So, the Americans win the agenda. They, what do they do? If the agenda wins, look at the highest value card in hand. Okay. And he can issue aligned with that highest card's attributes. If played on strategic materials, issue game on strength. If played on an issue on the Soviet track or Churchill, game on strength. That gives them up to 5, but this 2 plus 3 will give them 5, 2 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 1 plus 2. So it's going to come down to one of these 3 cards, which all will give the Americans a potential strength of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a 5, which means we're going to choose a pole mill issue. And there are 4 pole mill issues. And there are instructions, I think. I think they tend to like the most clandestine networks. So the American's going to choose this one and place that on the track equal to the difference between their strength card, which was a 5, and the lowest strength card, which was the Soviet 4. Difference of 1 means this just goes to 1 on the US track. Now the aim of this debate is to get these issues effectively, first of all, on your track. So I'm trying to get issues on the UK track, and you lock an issue in if you can advance it to your chair. Okay, so that was the American. They get that bonus for winning. Now it goes to the left around the table, which is the UK, and I get to choose 2 issues to bring to the track. Now, I like the idea of getting some US production, and I've lost this this global issue of self-determination. I'd like to bring this back to colonialism. It's in the UK interest, so I'm going to bring a global issue back to the table for discussion. It then heads around to the Soviet Union, and when selecting their global issues, they do the same thing. They select their strongest cards in their hand. That'll be a 4, that'll be a 6. So that's definitely, well, there's already a global issue, so we can't add that again. We played on a production issue, plus 2 strength. Well, we have a US production and a UK production. 1, 2, 3, it's USA. 4, 5, 6, it's me. And place a naval marker, that doesn't matter. On a directed offensive issue, it's 2. So they are going to want a directed offensive. There are 2 Americans, 1 of mine, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's me. It's me. And they're putting the pressure on me, these Russians. Okay, back now to the Americans. So they, again, consider their most powerful cards. We've got that one. Strategic Materials gives them 5. And an issue... Okay, so they're going to add Strategic Materials for a start. And then that'll be a 3, that'll be a 4. No. That'll be a 3, so it really comes down to less than Strategic Materials. So another directed offensive. They're going to... Oh, they don't want to... Yeah. I'll add a Soviet directed offensive to the table. What else can they do? And that's it, I think. Alright, so we had the USA who picked an issue, advanced it down their track. The UK picked 2, the Soviets picked 2, and the Americans have picked 2. That's the end of the agenda segment. We then move in to the meeting segment. Starting with the player clockwise in the winner, that's me. I play 1 staff card and advance an issue. Now I want to save my big cards. This is a pretty bad hand. Alan Brock's a bit of a gamble, so I won't use him till dead last, but I don't want to start off too strong. He's played in a pole mill issue, plus 3 strength. I'll give him 4. He's played an issue that is on the US track, plus 2 strength. I'd like to get that pole mill issue, get some clandestine counters out. So I'm going to play this. On the pole mill issue here, it is a strength of 1 plus 2 because this is on the US track, so 1, 2, 3. Now, the Soviet national characteristic is Niet. Whenever they debate an issue, they gain plus 1 strength. Now, I've chosen to advance this issue of pole mill. The Russians will debate if they can move an issue onto the Soviet track. First of all, I'll get these into order. And, I mean, they only need a strength of, well, they get a plus 1 bonus. They need a strength of 2 to bring it onto their track. That won't do it. That won't do it. That's a strength of 2. But there is a production issue that they might save for later. That is a strength of 2, a strength of 4, and a strength of 4. I think this is the weakest card that they can play to get it onto their track. So strength of 2 plus 1 is 3. 1, 2, 3. The Soviets gain control of that pole mill issue. And because they've debated, they will pass in their next turn. Alright, and then the Americans can't debate. So then it comes around to Soviet turn. They are going to pass. Brings around to the American turn. And now, where's the American priorities? Their intent is to hold the strongest card. They will only advance the second front all strategic materials issues. In fact, sorry, just going back to the card choice. Go to agenda issue choices, but if Western Front is Bolero, always pick second front as first issue. That's what I should have done instead of strategic materials. So I'll put that back and pick second front. That's the second issue that they should have picked. In fact, I should have picked that earlier, but let's just say Roosevelt forgot to mention it. So now we want to start with his low card. That's a strength of 1 plus 2, strength of 2 plus 1. Okay, so it's going to be one of these 2 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If played on strategic material issue, plus 1 strength. But they will only advance that if it will move to the centre, so they actually don't want to play that. Instead, if played on a directed offensive, they're going to play 1, 2, 3 to move the British directed offensive onto their track. That's problematic. I don't want them dictating where my offensive goes, but I don't really want to waste my cards at this stage, so I'll pass. The Soviets, yeah, well, they can move it back onto their track. It's probably not a great move for them to make. But with either of these two, if they play Nikolai Kuznetsov, it's a strength of 4 + 1 is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 brings it onto the USSR track. And once again, they will pass on their turn because they've debated. Comes around now again to my turn. And I'm going to save that for later. I'd like to get that pole mill issue, so that's a pretty important bonus for me. I could get that. I'd like to have some control over my directed offensive, but it's not overly important. Churchill is still active at the conference. It may be time to use Sir Alan Brooke on this global issue. I'll just see how it goes first. So when you use your Chief of Staff, you can roll the dice first to determine his strength, which is a 2 before you determine what issue you want to use him on. Oh, gee. All right, let's. I don't necessarily want the Russians to have control of a global issue. I want them to exhaust their cards before I start debating issues that they can bring back. So what's an issue that I don't necessarily mind losing? Maybe strategic materials. All right, so I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up to, yeah, because I expect that the Russians, the Russians will, they need strength of, I guess, minimum of 2. Strategic materials, if played in a production issue. Alright, so the lowest they need is Andrei Shazanov. It gives them a strength of 2 + 1 is 3. 1, 2, 3 places it on the Russian track. And the Americans don't need to debate that. This is where the Russians sort of exhaust a lot of their cards trying to get issues on their track early in the debate. The Russians are going to pass again. It comes around to the Americans. They are going to play their strength 3 to focus on the strategic material. Yes. So 1, 2, and 3. So they're picking the lowest valued card in their hand that will enable them to bring an issue onto their track. That's what they've just done. I am not going to debate this because I think the Russians are just going to move it straight back. It comes around to the Russians, and neither of those two cards will have any effect on this issue. So they're going to use their Minister of Foreign Affairs, Molotov, of course, to bring that back 5 steps towards Russia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 + 1 for Niet. Brings it way up close to the Soviet chair. I'm okay with this because it's wasting a lot of expensive Russian cards. Now, it comes around to my turn, and again, trying to play conservatively. I don't want that to get too far up the Russian track. They're going to pass on their turn. It may be time. No. What can I shift? Something small. The smallest card I have is going to be a 4 or a 4. let's have these guys debate this UK directed offensive. 1, 2, 3, 4. Comes around to the Russians, and they don't have the cards to bring it back to the Soviet track, but they'll save Stalin to debate another head of state. Well, no, this isn't Churchill events. Keep him active. If still active during a tie break, use him to break a tie. Okay, no, so they're not going to challenge that. And the Americans won't debate that because they'll only debate an A-bomb research or global issue, and only if it would bring them onto their side of the track. Yeah, okay, so I pretty safely controlled that offensive. Maybe I should have picked something else. The Russians pass again, and it comes around to the Americans. They now have a strength of 2, 3, so 5, 5, 5, 4. Alright, so this is their weakest card at the moment. It's the strength 4, and any one of these 5, 6 issues. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't think they are driven by... Okay, so the second priority is to advance strategic materials if it will move to the centre, and they want to do that. That'll move it right to the centre. So, yep, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good for the Americans. That's exactly what they want. That's their second priority on advancing an issue. Back around to my turn. The Russians haven't objected to anything yet. I know they're weak with only a couple of ones. What can I really push hard on? Maybe US production. Or maybe I can grab that whole mill. No, I'm going to play this. Churchill selective in the conference, +2 strength. 3 + 2 is 5. I am going to grab... Yeah, I think US production. Straight up to 5. No, sorry. Yeah. Maybe the global issue that I want. Yeah. Global issue. Of course, the Russians aren't going to contest that. And if the Americans really want to debate it, which they do, they'll only advance debate. They'll debate a global issue if the card they play would advance the issue onto their track. Use Roosevelt if necessary. Now, the good thing is, strength 5, none of these cards will move that onto their track, which means they're going to have to use Roosevelt. If played in the global issue, there's on the UK track, gain 1 political alignment marker. Well, it's not great that they gain a marker. It comes down 7, but it is good that they've had to use Roosevelt. And after his use, they roll 2d6. On a 2 or 3, Roosevelt dies. He's not dead, but he is now inactive. Okay, he is being used. Whew. Yeah, so that was the American debate. Now it comes around to the Russians, and they have 2 cards. Either of these are good, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're going to use this guy. If played on a directed offensive, which they're going to want to do, are they? They want to advance an issue onto the Soviet track. So they're not going to actually pick that directed offensive. It's going to be basically a random choice. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, they move the second front. I don't know if they necessarily want that. Is that it seems contrary to Soviet interests. But there is nothing to say that they won't they won't advance the second front. It just says this is the strongest card they have. Advance an issue onto the Soviet track, move an issue closer to the Soviet track. They're all, as I said, there's 4 in the center. Pick randomly. There is nothing in the decision implement segment to say that they will not do that. Okay, so they're contesting the idea of a second front. I suspect the Americans will debate that, because the Americans... No. They will only debate A-bomb research and a global issue. So they're not going to challenge that. I'm not going to challenge that. However, when it comes around to the American turn, they will advance the second front if it will move to the centre. They're just going to play their lowest card to do so. So it's a 5. 5 and a 5. I think they'd probably play that because they want to keep strategic materials in the centre, and they're just going to bring that second front back to the centre. It's one of the few circumstances where you can keep, you don't have to move a counter the whole way. The idea with second front and global strategic materials is these two. You can keep them in the centre without anybody controlling them. I'm not contesting that. I think Stalin might, though. It will move the issue onto the Soviet track. So they're going to play this, their last card, to bring the second front 1, 2 for their bonus. Again, it just seems contrary to Soviet interest, but as I said, there's nothing to say they shouldn't do that. Which brings it around to my turn. The Russians are done. They're not going to contest anything else. I want to get control of this global issue back. Having said that, I've played on the card on the US track. I might save... Oh, what do I do? Okay, let's go pole mill, see what the Americans do. +3 strength. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. The Americans, are they going to contest this? No. They will only contest debate, A-bomb research and global issues. Maybe I should have played global first, that way they'd burn their hair. No, because they would have passed. So they're not going to debate that. It comes around to the American turn. Okay, 5 and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're going to play on a pole mill issue for +3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They wrest control of that away from me. Back to my turn. If played on an issue on the US track, +1 strength. Okay, so do I go for something? I think I might just try and get some control of US production. 1, 2, 3, 4. After use, roll d6. On a rolls on to 3, he dies, and his card is removed from play. Okay. Around to the American turn. If played on an issue on the Soviet track, or Churchill is active, +1 strength. They will, advance an issue. So I'll pick the strongest card and attribute that advances an issue onto the US track. So basically they've got up to 5 strength. Any one of these issues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, they will want to advance second front to the centre, which is easy. Maybe I should have gone for that global issue. Oh well, live and learn. So the Americans play the last card to bring second front back to the centre. That is the end of the meeting segment. We now go to the decision segment where we resolve this. Sorry, I should say, first of all, the player with the most issues wins the conference. It's a tie between me and the Americans. We're on 2 each. Okay, so I've just had to check the tiebreaker procedure. During this decision segment, if 2 or more players have won the same number of issues, starting with Stalin and proceeding to the left, a player can use their leader to break the tie. Stalin is not involved in the tiebreaker. The Americans have used Roosevelt. I am still active, so I'm going to use Churchill to break the tie and secure the conference. for myself. The first leader to commit breaks the tie, and no future leader can change the outcome. In the circumstance where a player uses their leader to break a tie that they were not involved in, they choose who wins the tie. Will the Russians do that? Use Stalin to break a tie. So otherwise keep him active. If he's active during a tie break, use him to break a tie. Surely, because I'm losing, you want to give it to me, right? Right. It's unclear. In most cases... Yeah, I'm going to say I've won that conference. A, because I'm behind on the victory point track and the Americans are way ahead. I think it's unlikely that a human Stalin player would give it to the Americans. Or is it? So I'm claiming it for myself. Yeah. Okay. Now the decision segment. Place directed offensives. Because I've won my own directed offensive, I guess I have to... I'll play my own directed offensive. They must be one on the front's entry space. I'd like to advance the Mediterranean, so I guess I'll put it there. Then determine conditional issues. Okay, we each get one strategic production. That's easy to do. We determine production, how many productions counters we have to allocate. Well, I gain one from the USA. So they lose one, I gain one. That's that. Nobody gets UK production. Yeah, that's all the production markers. Starting with the player clockwise from the player starting with me, I execute my production decisions. I really want to advance these Mediterranean fronts, so I'm going to spend all 5 of my markers to gain offensive support in the Mediterranean. You can see I've placed those over there. The Russians have 4 production. And after filling in conference instruction and production, they don't have any pole mill issues. Use all main production for offensive support. They're all placed on the eastern front. Okay, so 4 production. One, 2, 3, 4. These are double-sided counters. One side has 1, the other side has times 2 up in the top left. And the Americans have, I think, 5 production left. Where do they spend their production? They have a pole mill issue, so they spend 1 production to gain 1 political counter and 3 clandestine counters. Okay, I just realised I made a small mistake. A directed offensive requires 2 production markers to place, to remove. So I've had to actually, it costs 2 production markers to effectively address that directed offensive requirement. And only after doing that, yeah. 6.6. Okay, so conference car production. Many conferences require that production markers be spent in certain theatre areas. This is the highest priority. Now, I think that means that I can spend an offensive support there. The Americans are spending an offensive support in Normandy. Okay. Now, if the Western Front is in theatre box, if the Western Front is in the UK, and the second front condition has been met, place naval support to 5, then use the remainder as offensive support in Normandy. So they're building four additional offensive supports there, which uses up all their production. All right. Theatre leadership. Okay, so there is, I think with theatre leadership, it is the theatre leader receives 1 offensive support or naval support. So I'm the theatre leader here, so I'm going to gain another offensive support in the Mediterranean. The Americans are theatre leaders here. They're going to, I guess, have a very weak attempt at the Marianas. There's no A-bomb research. The global issue. Well, the Americans won that, and they already control the issue against me. I'm guessing that means they instantly grab the Soviet one. So yeah, first take issue from neutral to US advantage. So the Americans, oops, sorry, that's the wrong one, is this one. They are advocating the United Nations. It costs 2 political alignment markers to remove an opponent's political alignment marker. I have to say, I think that's in the best interests of the USSR at the moment, because you can say have 4 markers around here. There's only 1 American political marker, so yeah. Okay, then we get to the war phase. Now, starting with the play with the most clandestine markers, so we each gain 1 clandestine marker. The Americans, starting with the Americans, place all markers onto the map. Now there are, again, rules for placing these. First of all, any country, so what are the rules here? All players can place markers in colonies without restriction. Okay. Any countries where a useful marker is stacked? Okay, so basically it's just rolling on this this pole mill table. Green is the column, red is the row. It is 66, which is Persia, which is spending 1 counter to remove mine. Thanks, America. Second counter, 44, which is the Middle East. Oh, thanks, America. Third counter, 65 is Cambodia, Laos. They already have 2 there, so we'll re-roll. Oh. Treated as no effect. Okay. And then 23, which is Romania. They will spend 1 to remove 1 of the Russian counters. Okay, then I think it comes around to me. I've got 1 counter. I am going to put 1 back in the Middle East. The Russians have 1. They're going to roll 21. The Netherlands. Okay, they're going to place a marker. I think it goes under my political marker. Now, it's the political alignment segment. Only the Americans have political markers. They gain 2 this turn. And they place them in countries with US networks and no political alignment marker at random. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3. And now the military segment. This is where the Germans and Japanese place their armies in certain fronts. Now, you follow basically a checklist. No front is attempting to enter Germany. Place a German army in the Eastern Front's entry space. So place 1 there. If the US has not exited, they have exited. If the US front has not exited the UK, place 4 German armies in the Eastern Front. That's good. So there's going to be no Germans confronting the Americans. That's bad for me. I keep thinking I'm the Americans. Okay, so the Germans are done. Now the Japanese in the Pacific. No front is entering Japan. The USSR has exited the far eastern box. So placed 2 Japanese armies there. A front is attempting to enter a B-29 space. So place a Japanese army there. And then roll a 6-sided die. It's a 4, so no effect. That didn't happen. And then they're distributed randomly. 3, which goes here. Now we attempt to advance the fronts 1 at a time. So we start off, I guess, up here. The front starts with a strength of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I basically need to roll on a 10-sided dice that I have placed over here, a 7 or less to advance that front. And I rolled a 9. Oops, that was a 9. So they do not advance again. In the Mediterranean, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, minus 2 is 5. I need 5 or less. No. Okay. I think I need to check out the balance on this dice. A lot of 9s. Alright, over in the eastern front. That is 6 minus 10 is -4. So that is instantly unsuccessful. Down here, 2 minus 4 is unsuccessful. 2 minus 0, I could get lucky, but not likely. Over here, 2 minus 2 is 0. And 2, 3, minus 2, I need 1 or less. 7. So once again, no military success anywhere on the board. I feel like I'm doing that wrong. That's 2 turns, 2 conferences in a row where I've had no military advances at all anywhere on the board. In 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fronts. Nothing happening. Maybe I'm not placing enough military markers. I feel like I'm putting all my production into military. I spent all that British production in the Mediterranean for nothing. Anyway, that's now we get to the post-mortem phase. Germany and Japan have not surrendered. It is not the end of the 10th conference. We then begin the next conference. So we start all over again. We draw the next conference card, which would be Conference 8, and go through that whole debate again. That is how Churchill works. Okay, so as you've seen, just in that very quick example, gameplay revolves around this track here. When you're playing with 2 bots, I mean, even after just 2 conferences, again, it's my first game, I'm getting a sense of how they're going to respond. So I know, I'm still trying to figure it out, but the Americans, okay, so the Russians will say niet to just about anything they can bring onto their track, and they jump out of the gates really early, bringing a lot of issues onto their track, but at least in the first 2 conferences I've seen, they tend to lose, as a result of that, they tend to lose control of those later in the game, later in the conference. The Americans will focus on sort of key issues, the second front, global issues, and strategic materials, A-bomb research if it's there, and they won't debate anything else, I think. What I've seen so far is, I mean, decks are balanced, but the Americans have been pretty lucky in those first 2 conferences to get some two pretty good hands, which has really helped them control issues pretty well. They got lucky to win that second conference agenda segment, although they lost to Roosevelt and thus lost the conference as a result of that. I'm still sort of scratching my head over the military side of things. As you may have seen over here, a lot of defensive support being allocated, and that all comes from production. So you can gain control of other nations' production. You can gain bonus production through strategic materials, which happened in that conference, and you're mainly focusing that on military support, either naval support or offensive support on the ground. You'll occasionally spend this production for the pole mill markers, which let you place these things. Oh, I should say, so placing and removing these changes the victory point differential, and I forgot to do that. But this is, I guess, the victory point schedule is incorrect. Sorry, the victory point track is incorrect at the moment. I certainly lost control of Persia. The Americans gained some political markers. Yeah. Whew. I'm missing a direct offensive somewhere. I'll find it in a moment. Anyways, that's how it works. Here it is. The bots work very well to give you a real challenge. I mean, I'm certainly losing the game based on the decisions they've been making, and it creates some interesting situations as the human player against these two bots. You can certainly have an idea of what they're going to do, and you can. I mean, I could have spent a lot more time reading the American cards, but I was trying, for my first game at least, not to read too far into what they're going to do. I mean, you could script the whole thing out and say this is what they're going to do, this is how they respond, but it kind of spoils the fun, spoils the surprise on my first game. So, and yeah, that's how it works. This close interaction between the two, this interesting dynamics between the three powers and their special abilities, their bonuses. You've seen there that the Russians are very good at debating. The Americans have their sort of core issues that they're interested in. The British are good at, I guess, setting the agenda, and they'll typically be very good at winning those agendas. I think a few people have said that they should be expected to win most, if not all, of the agenda segments, which gives them a big advantage going into those debates. They pick and gain an advantage in the first issue, and they get to pick that bonus issue, and of course it means they go last, so they'll usually have that one extra card at the end to hopefully shift an issue to their side. In that debate that we just saw, in the meeting segment that we just saw, the Americans had that advantage, that last turn advantage. So that is Mark Herman's Churchill by GMT Games, published in 2016. Yeah, there you go.